And it's 10, Superior Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man is actually OTTO Octavius, who prior to the Superior Spider-Man storyline had brain swapped with Peter. Yet a piece of Peter still remained in his own body and didn't die in Otto's body, which ended up convincing Otto to be a hero, albeit a darker one. This small bit of Peter that was left in his body was also trying to regain control, for obvious reasons, because a superhero was piloting his bone mech. This small bit of Peter though was at times able to interfere or even control Otto temporarily. One of these moments came in Superior Spider-Man number 8, where there was a device that was capable of wiping Peter from Otto's brain, but to get the actual item, Otto had to perform surgery on a little girl. However, Peter didn't think that Otto was actually able to do it, so he tries to stop Otto from even performing the surgery, but he also didn't want him to get the thing that would wipe him from his brain. Also, Otto did this surgery while having his Spider-Man mask on and an additional face mask. But either way, this version of Spider-Man was definitely more ruthless and willing to kill, since he was still technically a supervillain. And a 9, Kane. The clone that would come to be known as Kane was the Jackal's first attempt at cloning Peter Parker. Initially thought to be a success, Kane eventually became deformed due to a flaw in the cloning process, and he continued to degenerate, and he was left further deformed and mentally unstable. Aren't we all? The Jackal allowed Kane to live as like a test subject to see how long he would be able to survive, and it ended up exceeding Jackal's expectations. As a result though, Kane experienced a strong feeling of rejection that might be kind of like a father-son kind of thing, you know what I mean. Kane left and realized that the degeneration that had caused his mental state to decline had also amplified his powers that he had genetically kind of inherited from Peter. His strength, speed, stamina, and agility were also comparable to those of Peter, but he also gained precognitive powers as well, which showed him flashes of the future, which seemed to be sort of an amplified spider sense. He also possessed a Mark of Cain, which was a corrosive touch that he used to leave eaten away handprints on victims' faces, which is pretty damn scary if you ask me. Also, if you're enjoying this video and want to see more, be sure you hit that like button and subscribe because it really helps us out against the algorithm almighty. Also, I'm dressed as Spider-Man and talking about Spider-Man, so I feel like that's worth a like. And at 8, Pestilence Spider-Man. When Apocalypse started his plans for world domination, he captured 4 people who he saw as being good enough to be his horsemen and corrupted them. Spider-Man became the horseman known as Pestilence. Pestilence was one of the horsemen that Deadpool, Cannonball, and Siren encountered in their alternate reality search for Cable. And even though Pestilence was accompanied in the fight by Famine and Archangel, all 3 of them were defeated. This version of Peter Parker has the same powers as his 616 counterpart, except this time they've been augmented by Apocalypse when he corrupted them. But I mean, like a Spider-Man who is literally a horseman of the apocalypse and asks people if they will scream while he sucks the marrow from their bones, I think it's safe to say that this guy's pretty damn scary. And he made his first appearance in 2005, which makes this character around the same age that Peter was when he got his powers, which is kind of ironic. He hails from Earth 5701, which is the age of Apocalypse Earth. And it's 7, Ghost Spider. Ghost Spider comes from Earth 11638, and in this reality, Peter Parker's Uncle Ben never died, and actually ended up helping Peter to train as a hero with his new spider powers, becoming the Amazing Spider, a famous and popular superhero who also became a rich and successful scientist, having his own company called Parker Technologies. With his resources and motivation from Uncle Ben, the Amazing Spider used transportation technology to bring Spider-Men from other universes to his and absorb their powers to increase his. After bringing the Spider-Man from Earth 616 to his Earth though, and making him believe that he arrived in this universe by accident, the Amazing Spider was weakened by the feedback of the dimensional portal. Eventually, the Amazing Spider was convinced that what he was doing was not in fact heroic and allowed himself to die. But after dying, the Sorcerer Supreme of Dr. Banner, infused Peter's spirit that was trapped in hell with the powers of the damned, causing him to become a form of Ghost Rider, calling himself the Ghost Spider. And honestly, this is one of the baddest spider suits of all time. I love it. If I could figure out a way to cosplay this, I would. And it's 6, Zombie Spider-Man. Okay, so technically this is Spider-Man, but it's a zombie version of Spider-Man, but I'm gonna count it anyway, because this is pretty damn messed up, zombie or not. On Earth 2149, an alien plague ends up infecting all superpowered individuals and turns them into zombies. However, it's later revealed that the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead was actually what caused this plague. But after learning that the plague was really bad, since I guess the fact that they were calling it a plague wasn't enough, or the fact that the world had to shut down, so the population wasn't wiped out, Peter ran home to get Aunt May and Mary Jane the hell out of Dodge. But when he got there, we got a good old case of Parker Luck, protagonist syndrome. Boom, zombie spider. He ends up becoming a zombie as soon as he gets home and eats the 2 most important women in his life. He also fractured his jaw before becoming a zombie so he could open his mouth more, I guess. Or kind of like man spider it. Yeah, it's not a pretty sight. Like, even by zombie standards, it's ew. Halfway through into number 5, Man Spider. Man Spider is the mutated form of Spider-Man which appeared in both the comics and the 1990s animated series, with his original appearance actually coming from the animated series. In the 90s cartoon, Spider-Man's transformation into the Man Spider was not caused deliberately like it was in the comics, but as a result of his body mutating further from the original spider bite that gave him his powers. After his attempts to ask Professor X and the X-Men for help developing a cure meet with failure, Spider-Man turned to his friend Dr. Mariah Crawford for aid. Unfortunately, his initial attempt to cure himself resulted in him accelerating the actual mutation process and growing 4 new arms. The accelerated mutation subsequently caused him to mutate into the Man Spider after fighting the Punisher and a recently mutated Michael Morbius. The mutated Spider-Man retained some of his memories and his emotional responses to seeing loved ones or people who reminded him of his loved ones but could not communicate with them. Eventually, during the final episode of the storyline called Neurogenic Nightmare, Dr. Connors reprogrammed devices that Vulture was using to absorb youth from other people and caused him to give Peter back his spider powers but not the mutation, resulting in the Vulture mutating into Man Spider, although somehow he had gotten rid of this mutation off screen later in the series. It's also worth noting that the introduction of Man Spider in the comics, which was thanks to this animated series, is actually what introduced the biological web shooters from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man into the comics as well. And at 4, Spider Carnage. Spider Carnage is my favorite alternate version of Spider-Man. Also being introduced in the Spider-Man animated series in the 1990s like the Man Spider from last number, this version of Peter Parker shared most of his early life with his superhero counterpart. However, the difference between these two was that Aunt May at some point died as well, being buried next to Uncle Ben. Thanks to some messing around with interdimensional portals by Jonathan Ohm, a version of a Carnage symbiote from another universe sensed this Peter's anger and latched onto him, turning him into the Spider Carnage, a version of Spider-Man with the Carnage symbiote, if you couldn't tell. A villain set on revenge and the destruction of all realities. Spider Carnage is one of the coolest iterations of Spider-Man to date in my opinion, and it's part of the reason I love the 90s cartoon so much. I watch it all the way through just so I can see Spider Carnage at the end. And while there is a version from the comics just called the Spider, which is Spider-Man with the Carnage symbiote, this version wanted to destroy literally everything, so yes please, this is certainly the scarier of the two, just saying. Sorry comic lovers, okay? Look, I like the comics too, but Spider Carnage is definitely worse than the Spider. Getting close to the end at number 3, Patient Zero Spider-Man. After the Punisher accidentally released Survivor 118, a chemical designed to help people adapt to a post-apocalyptic environment, Spider-Man was the first to show symptoms from it after he ate the rhino during a hockey game. The Fantastic Four subdued him shortly afterwards and put him in a cage for experimentation, but Ben Grimm also succumbed to the plague himself and freed Spider-Man from captivity, though the exact reason why he did that is unknown. As he escapes into the city, he briefly fought Wolverine and the Punisher, but soon the world would start to fall apart, and heroes and villains alike would become cannibals, eventually leaving the Punisher as the only hero left to fight them. A turf war erupted among the emerging tribes of cannibals, due in part to the King of Death's manipulations in an attempt to thin the herd, but Spider-Man, now referred to as Patient Zero, was the most successful, and took control of all of Manhattan for his own tribe, while the others left to stake new lands. They had to conquer other places. Especially given the recent world issues though, I think that this is certainly something that I can say a good majority of people are afraid of. Although I bet that there are some survivors on this earth that say Survivor 118, that the Survivor 118 plague is fake. Calling it. Penultimately, in at number 2, Wolf Spider. At an unknown time in this universe, Wolf Spider gained spider-like powers, but unlike most other realities Peter Parker, he became a villain, remorselessly killing this universe's Miles Morales and everyone who stood for heroism and responsibility. Because, you know, we're bad guys, it's what we do. First appearing in the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon in Season 4, Episode 16, this guy isn't even the villain of just one world. After finding a shard of the Siege Perilous, he traveled through dimensions to find the rest. One of these dimensions was Blood Spider's homeworld, where he allied himself with the Lizard King. After turning almost everyone into vampires, which is weird because I mean it was called the Lizard King, well, wouldn't you want to turn them into lizards, but whatever. He and the Lizard King hatched a plan to block out the sun so that vampires could just roam free on the earth. And this sounds very Dawnguard Volkihar clan to me. Okay, Peter? Like, what you gonna tell me that you need to find Oriel's bow next? And like a daughter of Cold Harbor? I don't know. Scar. Wolf Spider, though, was cold and ruthless and obsessed with gathering the shards of Siege Perilous, and seemed to have a grudge against Spider-Man and every Miles Morales. An evil Peter Parker is always a scary thing. And finally, in at number 1, Spidersman. Peter Parker of Earth 11580 was once a promising young student, invited by Max Modal alongside his best friend Gwen Stacy to tour his bleeding edge company at Horizon Labs. One of the experiments the pair observed was a massive colony of spiders that Modell was bombarding with numerous radioactive particles in the name of genetic alteration. Parker, of course, fell into this colony where he seemed to be devoured, but in the process, the spiders became a singular hive mind construct that absorbed Peter's consciousness. So they started masquerading as the man they absorbed. The Hive, calling themselves Spidersman, put on the Spider-Man costume and began to fight crime in Cruel York. First appearing in Spider-Geddon number 3, I absolutely hate the idea of a whole human being made of spiders, because that's just up. Look, I'm arachnophobic except for the odd time where I need to impress someone, but it's absolutely horrific to think of any being made entirely of spiders, okay? I would actually rather die. Even if this is a good guy. No fucking way am I looking at this man and saying, oh yeah, let's let him help us. No, he can go burn with the rest of the spider species, as they should.
Number 10, Uncle Ben Spider-Man. I've had people ask me before about a world where Uncle Ben potentially becomes Spider-Man, and well, I'm here to tell you it already exists. This version of Uncle Ben first appeared in the Spiderverse story. He was with Peter when the radioactive spider came along and ended up biting him instead of young Peter Parker. Discovering he had gained powers, Uncle Ben set out to do what you'd expect him to, try and use them for good to help people. However, this career as a vigilante would be short-lived. After the murder of his wife May and nephew Peter at the hands of his arch nemesis, he retired. For a while, he also went into hiding after Ezekiel Sims came to warn him of Moreland. Eventually, however, he would be found by Silk, who would then, with the help of the other spiders, recruit him into their ranks to help them take on the Inheritors. Number 9, Web-SLINGER. Web-SLINGER is our Wild West Spider-Man. Named Patrick O'Hara, this alternate Spider-Man first appeared in the comics in 2014, and would also have an animated version of his character appear a few years later in 2016 in the Disney XD animated series Ultimate Spider-Man. Web-SLINGER also works alongside his partner and horse, Widow. We'd also learn that he has a special connection with his horse as well. They were actually both bitten by the same radioactive spider, which grants them a telepathic connection that Web-SLINGER likes to refer to as his rider sense. And before we move on to our next spot, if you love the world of alternate Spider-Man as much as I do, be sure to show that love by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, Spider-Man. While fans of the world of spider totems and alternate Spideys may know Spider-Man, she's still only made just a handful of appearances in the comics, if you can believe that. I decided to include her here to shout out how awesome she is to those who have yet to meet her, because Spider-Man deserves a series of her own, or at the very least, a movie appearance. And Into the Spider-Verse 2, maybe? We see Spider-Man's origins in a what-if issue where the question is posed, what if Aunt May had been bitten by that fateful radioactive spider instead? After Peter forgot to take his lunch with him to school, Aunt May set out to deliver it, and it was while running this errand that she was bitten by the spider, granting her powers instead of Peter. And Spider-Man was born! In this reality, Uncle Ben and Peter Parker still both live as well, and are actually part of Aunt May's team, knowing her secret. Uncle Ben provides the heart, Peter's the brains, and May provides the courage and the bronze. Number 7, Spidersman. This alternate version of the character is like something out of a horror story, and I've personally always been a big fan of that idea for Spider-Man characters, that integration of horror that we sometimes see. I mean, the character, when you think about it, is meant to be someone whose genetics mutated and became kind of spliced with the spiders. What isn't freaky about that, I ask you? Spidersman is a version of Peter who fell into a vat of spiders and ended up being devoured, but at the same time, his consciousness remained, being transferred to that of spiders. So think Swarm, but with spiders instead of bees. And voila! He became the horrifying alternate version of Spidey known as Spidersman, with all of Peter's memories, but without his original body, and where his power is spiders. Number 6, Stan the Spider-Man? A very brief appearance for this character, but still, this is a thing that officially happened in the comics. Stan Lee is even listed as being this version of Spider-Man in the breakdown of characters who appeared in this issue online. Spider-Geddon issue number 5 at the beginning has a tribute to Stan the Man Lee, who passed away the same year only about a month earlier. But the tribute isn't confined to just the cover or the insert in his memory. They also included a tribute in the story for Stan, where he appears as one of the alternate Spider-Men, helping to save the day. We don't know much about this alternate Spider-Man, but we do know he's meant to be an alternate version of both Spidey and Stan combined. Number 5, the Spider. Still a bit of a mysterious figure for us. The Spider is an alternate version of Spider-Man where instead of Peter Parker, we have Detective George Stacy in the role. Yep, that's right, that's Gwen's father. In fact, he even joined up with his alternate daughter, Ghost Spider, who recruited him for the Spider Army. That had to have been interesting. Detective Stacy seems to fake an injury to help keep his identity a secret. We know that in the alternate Earth that he is from, he still has his daughter Gwen, or had her. It's unclear as to whether she is still alive or maybe died when we first meet him. He wears an all-black suit which looks like a tactical stealth suit with white lines stretching from the crown of his head down to his forehead, and a thin white spider on his chest. Number 4, Spider-Girl. But not any of the first people that come to mind when we say Spider-Girl. This alternate version of Spider-Man comes to us from the What If series, from an issue where we get to imagine 3 different characters becoming Spider-Man. One of them being Betty Brant. Betty Brant's Spider-Girl has really only made a few major appearances in the comics since her debut in 1978, and when you see her costume, I'm sure you're gonna understand perhaps why that's happened. In the What If series, hers was one of the few that didn't end in death, with her quitting being Spider-Girl instead after she learned she had failed to stop Uncle Ben's killer. Rather than be inspired to commit to a life as a vigilante, this event actually had the opposite effect on Betty Brant, though we'd find out later that Betty didn't completely give up being Spider-Girl, as she would appear much later in the Spiderverse story. Number 3, Savage Spider-Man. I know there have probably been a lot of characters from various stories who share this kind of origins, but Savage Spider-Man's still always makes me think of Cyclops, aka Scott Summers. I know he's not the only one to have an origins like this, but they're similar to me. This version of Peter Parker was the only known survivor after the plane he was on with his parents exploded. That's the part that's similar. The rest of it is not. Young Peter managed to parachute to safety, but landed in Savage Land, right in the middle of a nest of giant spiders. These spiders raised him as their own, and it was through their venomous bites that he gained powers, as well as likely building up a natural resistance. I'm assuming that part, but I think it's fair to guess. This version of Spider-Man is the sworn protector of the Savage Lands from all of those who would seek to do it harm or do harm to its creatures. Not on Savage Spider-Man's watch. Basically Spider Tarzan. Number 2, the other old man Peter. I call him the other, not in reference to that storyline, the other, but in reference to the fact that we have alternate old man Peter Parker from Reign, who, while still obscure, is a little more well known, I think, because, well, he's just so frighteningly sad and memorable. Other old man Peter, however, is still pretty excellent, and I think he deserves to be remembered as well. He's a lot more optimistic than his fellow old counterpart, except when it comes to one thing. This version of Peter Parker resides in a retirement home with an elderly Wade Flippin' Wilson. Understandably, both elderly alternates appear in the Spider-Man/Deadpool series and end up getting involved in an adventure with our mainstream heroes themselves. In this alternate reality, Peter Parker lives out the rest of his life after getting paralyzed from the waist down, getting around in a wheelchair. But of course, still 100% a badass, because yeah, people in wheelchairs also a badass. He can even roll up walls and still is insanely strong. Still not a Spidey that you would want to mess with. Also, I love that old man Spidey always has like a bow tie. I think it's super cute. Number 1, Golden Sponge Cake Spider-Man. Basically, Hostess Spider-Man. This alternate Spider-Man was far too good for our world and was one of the first killed in the Spiderverse event. No! He fought his villains by using tasty, tasty Hostess snacks, which apparently can tame any villain. Is the reality just like that villains are all hungry? I wonder if they would work on Galactus. You need some big ones. Hostess Spider-Man originally appeared in the Hostess brand ads, but as a Spider-Verse is a wide world event, he was incorporated into the main story, only to really be killed off, poor guy. His editorial name had to be changed due to trademark issues, as he was, of course, no longer running in a hostess ad. But on to the main story, baby. Does this mean there is a whole alternate world filled with hostess ad characters? Because Spider-Man wasn't the only hero to appear in those. What happened to the rest of that world? Is it still out there? I want to go to that alternate Earth.
Kicking off the list at number 10. Ghost Spider. Coming from Earth 11638, aka the perfect world. Okay. This Peter Parker has a much brighter beginning, meaning Uncle Ben never actually passed away and gave the whole great responsibility speech. Instead, he encourages Peter to become a stronger Spider-Man, which sounds good on paper. It sounds like the ideal world. But does he recommend protein shakes and proper exercise and nutrition? No. See, Uncle Ben pushes Peter to abduct Spider-Man from other worlds and then absorb their life force via this portal that Parker Technologies created. So he's a bit of a dick, this Uncle Ben. He's not really the nicest guy. Maybe he's fine, I don't know. This whole system seems a little bit whack. Now eventually Earth 616 Spider-Man shows up. They both hear about each other. It's interesting because Uncle Ben poisons our Peter and then he wakes up confused and they fight it out and our Peter Parker comes out on top, luckily, with the perfect amazing spider getting his soul sucked into that machine. Now the perfect Spider-Man spirit was then trapped in the underworld like hell, and then from here it only gets more strange. Well, rather it gets more Banner. See, Banner was the current Sorcerer Supreme at this time, so he ended up freeing Peter in his astral form, but then Peter absorbed all those spirits of the damned while he was down there, so when he came back up, this perfect spider was now Ghost Spider. Number 9, Old Man Spider. Ezekiel Sims from Earth 4, aka Old Man Spider, took over the web-slinging spot after Peter Parker lost his life to Morlun. Now, Ezekiel first appeared in Edge of Spiderverse issue 5. He was actually recruited by Spider UK, who I'll talk about a little bit later, to go against Morlun and the Inheritors. Now, Ezekiel rescued Ben Reilly and Kane from the Inheritors, which is awesome, and then a bunch of other spider beings were then recruited, but Deimos tracked them down and snapped the Spider-Man's neck. He caught him off guard. Brutal. And in his last words, he revealed his true self and told Peter to protect Silk, aka the bride. All that matters. What a beautiful last sentence. We love impactful last words here at Top 10 Nerd. It's the best. And you know what else we like? We like when you like our videos. Literally, go and give this video a thumbs up and it will do wonders for our channel. We're trying our best, so you know, all we ask is for a little click. Maybe subscribe, maybe like, maybe notifications if you're feeling good. I don't know. Let's get back to the list. Number 8, Spider UK. Here he is, Billy Braddock himself. I told you I'd talk about him. He began his life as Captain Britain, actually, before he was webbing people up. So he's actually rocking both teams. He's a busy guy. He's on the Captain Britain team and then the Spider Army. He made his first appearance in Edge of Spiderverse issue 2 over on Earth 833. Now, this Spider-Man is one of my favorite versions. His arc is so fun. He can hop between dimensions whenever he chooses, and then after the defeat of the Inheritors, spoilers, he keeps an eye on Earth 3145, and then during the Spider-Geddon storyline, in issue 2, Spider UK dies in an explosion and is buried in England on Earth 803, the home of Lady Spider, who loved the idea of Spider UK being buried in the same cemetery as her parents because she loved him like a brother, of course. Brother zoned even after death. He's down there like, really? Okay. Number 7, Spider-Man. Literally, this gets a little gross. Now imagine if Spider-Man had more spider than man when he was bit. That's what happened to Patton Parnell when he first entered comics in Edge of Spider-Verse issue 4. See, Patton lived a pretty dark life. He lived with an abusive Uncle Ted, he would perform horrible experiments on animals, and he spied on his neighbor Sarah Jane. So it's not a healthy system that he's got going on here in any way, really. One day, Sarah Jane and Patton went to Alcorp Industries in hopes of freeing all these test animals, but that's when Patton saw this red radioactive spider. He was like, I want to touch it. And then he did, got bit, and then got kicked out. Now, overnight, he didn't get jacked. His vision didn't get better. He wasn't webbing up Dr. Peppers and lamps. When he got his abilities, he started eating everything. He ate a mouse, and then he ate a cat, and then when Uncle Ted walked in, he was like, what's up? Now, this version is, of course, extremely powerful, but he's also extremely dark. We love the balance. We love balance. Number 6, Spider Cyborg. Coming from Earth 2818, this version is a dark future Spider-Man. I mean, look at him, of course. There's some sort of future-ness going on here. He made his first debut in Superior Spider-Man issue 33. Now, it's Peter Parker if he got cybernetic additions. It's badass. That's basically all it is. His one eye can zoom in, go all tactical. The claws can certainly leave a mark. And one of the most remarkable features, his arm cannon, his sonic arm cannon, That's definitely a plus. Now, before Karn came to Earth 2818, our Superior Spider-Man warned him, and then when Kane finally did show up, Superior Spider-Man and some other webbed friends joined the battle. His left eye being a red lens is actually a nod to his appearance early on in the 90s in Spider-Man issue 21, titled Dealing Arms. Number 5, the Scarlet Spider. Ben Reilly first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man issue 149 as a clone. He was part of the whole clone thing that went on for way too long. But it wasn't until Spider-Man issue 5 that he was introduced to readers as the Scarlet Spider. Now, the Jackal created the clone using Peter's DNA, and he was made to fight Peter, of course. He's like, hey, if you can't beat him, just clone him. Now, the two were fighting it out in order to save Ned from a bomb, and then when the clone seemingly died, he was soon buried after. But the thing is, the Jackal injected him with something earlier so he could survive something like this. Of course. So for the next 5 years, he thought of himself as the useless clone that came back to life, then gave himself the name Ben Reilly. So depressed. Perhaps one of the better elements to come from the Clone Saga was Ben Reilly. One of the few things. Number 4, Spider-Man 2099. Ah yes, the not so near future. 2099 Spider-Man, aka Miguel O'Hara, is the current web-slinger over there, and his outfit is one of the more memorable ones. His DNA was biologically mixed with a spider's DNA, so it's a little bit different than our spider bite scenario that we have. Now, he worked at Alchemex and was pressured by the company to test genetic coding, and after Mr. Sims didn't make one of those test runs, just went horrible, Miguel was then poisoned by Tyler Stone with a fatal drug named Rapture, so Miguel ended up relying on the drug so much that he couldn't quit his job. How brutal is that? It's like every McDonald's employee. It's like, yeah, you want free nuggets? Yeah, sign in tomorrow. You're not going anywhere. So Miguel ended up relying on the drug so much that he tried to genetically fix himself and fix his body. Now, of course, this had a brighter turnout than expected, but Miguel inherited Spider-Man abilities plus telepathy. Must be nice. Number 3, the Spider. Earth 15 Spider-Man, simply referred to as the Spider, comes into comics during the Exile storyline issue 12. Now, he was another Cletus Cassidy pretty much. I mean, he was a red-haired psycho who had no problem taking out innocent people, so when the Spider symbiote came along in this Earth, it merged with evil Peter, who was sentenced to not 1, not 2, but 67 life sentences from a jury. Okay, so he's bad. He was a big part of the Weapon X team, and he had Deadpool's sense of humor too, which made him just that much more evil. Now, in Exiles issue 44, he was finally stopped by Firestar when she hit him with a mega blast. He was later buried in the prison cemetery, so even after death, you're still doing that time. Number 2, Miles Morales. Of course, we gotta talk about him. He made his first appearance in Ultimate Fallout issue 4, just a couple months right before the death of Peter Parker. Now, this is a crazy time because Norman Osborn was just arrested and revealed as the Green Goblin, and while Miles was visiting his Uncle Aaron, an enhanced spider crawled out of Aaron's bag, bit Miles, and Bob's your uncle. You know the rest. Now, he got these amazing Spider-Man abilities, but he could also camouflage himself almost fully invisible. Plus, Venom Blasts will help get the job done, that's for sure. The new PlayStation Spider-Man game is way more fun with these added abilities. Makes it way better, so I had to put them on this list and talk about them. Especially if we're talking about abilities. Hold L1 and just punch someone's chest through the wall, you're like, yeah, this is great. And finally, number 1, Cosmic Spider-Man, aka Captain Universe. This Spider-Man is one of, if not the most powerful alternate version of the Web-Slinger. Cosmic Spider-Man went toe-to-toe with Rune King Thor and came out on top, so if you're not sold now, just get out of here. Actually, don't get out of here. Watch the rest of this video. Don't even say that. Never mind. Cosmic Spider-Man is from Earth 13. He retains the powers of the Enigma Force, and he first appears in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, Issue 9. Cosmic Spider-Man can't leave his universe or else he would lose the Enigma Force. That's why the resistance of spider heroes were based in Central Park of Earth 13. They're like, hey, no sweat, we'll come to you, no problem. We don't mind the commute. He meets his demise only a couple issues later, sadly, when the Inheritors were hunting down Spider-Man and their leader Solus drained the Enigma Force from him. But we can find more of him in What If Volume 2, Issue 31, titled What If Spider-Man Had Kept His Cosmic Powers, which I may or may not touch on in my next video. We'll see, stay tuned, it's a good one.
In a 10, Spider-Man. In this What If story, Peter forgets his lunch at home, so Aunt May rushes to the science demonstration to give it to him, because, you know, that's gonna help with the bullying. Except this causes her to be the one who gets bit by the radioactive spider, and Aunt May becomes Spider-Man. But don't worry, dear, Spider is more of a costume to me than my identity. In truth, I'm just your friendly neighborhood aunt. Using a costume to hide her real identity may set out to earn money for the family doing stunts. However, when the villain Leapfrog made an appearance, the Spider-Man defeated him and became a crime fighter. And I probably find this too funny considering how this wasn't like actually invented at the time. However, a leapfrog is like one of those like Game Boy Light things for kids that, you know, they have like educational games on them or whatnot, or like games where you have to like jump over the logs to get across the river. So I just imagine imagine Aunt May fighting with technology instead of a supervillain, and I love it. It's so good. Not to mention that when the threat of the inheritors was stopped by transferring their consciousness into infant human babies, the children were adopted by May and brought back to her Earth. I love it.
Coming in at number 9, we've got the malfunctioning spider clone known as Kane. The original very first Peter Parker clone created by the Jackal, Kane was considered a failed experiment due to his cells degenerating into a deformed state. This degeneration also had a side effect of actually enhancing Kane's spider abilities, however, making him initially stronger and faster than the other Spider-Men, and with his spider sense essentially capable of getting brief flashes of future events. Despite his complicated beginnings as a villain of the Clone Saga, particularly taking an interest in fighting Ben Reilly, Kane would go on to find some sort of redemption by taking up the anti-hero mantle of the Scarlet Spider in the city of Houston, finally finding a place where he could carve out his own identity as a hero. From a falling apart, bearded version of Peter Parker to a spider that can stand on its own, that's one hell of a character arc for a clone named Kane.
And it ain't Miguel O'Hara. Miguel was born after his mother had an affair with her husband's boss, Tyler Stone, the vice president of Alchemax. Yeah, that's not going to create any issues. After being forced to start human trials on research that wasn't complete, Miguel went to Stone to quit from his position at Alchemax. However, Stone ended up giving him a dose of a highly addictive substance known as Rapture. Alchemax was the only place that made Rapture, so he figured that since he was now addicted, Miguel would have to stay. But Miguel had programmed his own DNA into the machine it used in the human trial as kind of like a control, so he was able to put himself in the machine and tried to reset his DNA back to what it was before he was addicted to Rapture, because Rapture combines with your DNA. But this instead combined his DNA with that of a spider, which granted him the same powers as Spider-Man, but on a non-radioactive level, along with a couple upgrades like telepathy and talons that grow from his fingertips. It was actually so bad it caused some dude to fall to his death, so I actually kind of want some.
Coming in at number 7 is a character that started out as a pun, but wound up becoming so much more. It's the spectacular Spider-Ham. Going under the name of Peter Porker, and a bit confused as to whether he's a pig with the strength and agility of a spider, or a spider with all the limitations of a pig, Spider-Ham comes from a version of the Marvel Universe where everyone is some form of anthropomorphic animal. Although initially only appearing in parody storylines against villains such as Doctor Doom and Raven the Hunter, Peter Porker would prove he could more than hold his own when he crossed over into the mainstream Marvel Universe to help save the world from the vampiric, soul-sucking inheritors. That'll do, pig. That'll do.
In at 6, OTTO Octavius. After brain swapping with Peter, leaving Peter's consciousness in his own dying body, OTTO Octavius decided to become a better Spider-Man. A superior one, if you will. During his time as Spider-Man, Otto shattered Scorpion's jaw, blinded the Vulture, and killed the mass murderer Massacre. Man, that's a lot of M's. He also performed numerous involuntary acts, like stopping himself from killing Boomerang, which was later revealed to be because a small bit of Peter was still alive inside of Otto. When the Avengers decided to examine Spider-Man to find a reason for this change of behavior, they couldn't find anything. But after thinking that he expelled Peter, Octavius helped Mayor Jameson assist with the execution of Alistair Smythe. And even though Smythe managed to temporarily take over the raft, Otto managed to defeat his allies, Vulture, Boomerang, and Scorpion, and kill the villain, secretly taking the Vulture as a captive, because, you know, that's what Otto does. During the conflict though, Jameson ordered Spider-Man to execute Smythe when he had escaped, and then using this evidence to blackmail Jameson, Spider-Man forced the mayor to allow the raft to become his new headquarters that he called Spider Island 2, which I mean, like, it's pretty badass, but like, it's a little shifty, or a lot shifty, but I like your chutzpah, okay? We need these kind of cutthroat tactics in the superhero world, okay? Good on you, Otto.
Coming in at number 5, we've got John Jameson, the Astro Spider. That's right, in the alternate universe of Earth 3145, the son of infamous Spidey hater J. Jonah Jameson is actually himself a space-themed version of Spider-Man. During a trip during his day job as an astronaut, John Jameson found himself with a spider inside his spacesuit while being bombarded with cosmic rays. Don't you hate when that happens? These rays merge their genetics and turn John Jameson into the Astro Spider. Instead of web fluid, John's webs are made of psychic energy, and on top of all of his usual spider abilities, he has the telepathic ability to read minds. Something tells me that his father might not approve of his new line of work, however.
And at 4, Ben Reilly. Ben Reilly is a clone of Peter Parker, but goes on to create his own identity of Scarlet Spider. So technically, it isn't Peter, okay? Ben was created by Miles Warren, the supervillain known as the Jackal, to torment actual Spider-Man, and seemingly he died in their first encounter. But the clone actually ended up surviving and exiled himself for 5 years, only returning to New York after learning that Aunt May was sick, because I guess technically he's her aunt, or she's his aunt too. Semantics. After making amends with Peter, Ben fought alongside him as the Scarlet Spider. For a brief period of time, Ben and Peter were actually tricked by Norman Osborn to believe that Ben was the real Peter Parker. So the guy currently going by the name Peter left New York with his wife, Mary Jane, you know, and then left Ben to pick up the mantle of Spider-Man because, you know, why not? Might as well. During the events of another fight against Osborn though, as the Green Goblin, Ben was impaled and died in Peter's arms. Also discovering that Peter being the clone was just total BS. It was a lie. So I mean, like, at least the real Peter didn't die. He would later be revived, but still, this is one of the most iconic Spider-Man alternate versions in existence, so you knew he was gonna be on this list.
At number 3, we've got Gwen Stacy, aka Spider-Gwen, aka Spider-Woman, aka Ghost Spider. Geez, this girl goes by a lot of names. In an alternate universe where Gwen Stacy and not Peter Parker was the one bitten by a radioactive spider, things turned out much differently than the regular Marvel universe. Bullied relentlessly by his peers and without any powers of his own, this version of Peter eventually becomes the Lizard after stealing Dr. Connor's serum and has to be tragically killed by his best friend Gwen before he can hurt anyone else. This leaves Spider-Gwen feeling she must atone for her friend's death and become the greatest hero she can, something she's continued to do over the years with more and more crossovers into the mainstream Marvel universe, where she can help and perhaps even outpace the Peter Parker of their world.
Penultimately, in at number 2, Stan Lee. One of the major elements of Spider-Geddon is that the book is packed with spider beings or spiderlings from every corner of the Marvel universe. Ignore the fact that I messed up saying corner. We're talking Spider UK, Octavia Otto, Spider-Woman, which is Aunt May from Earth 982, which is different from Spider-Man, don't worry, Spider-Gwen, Spider-Ham, and many, many more. This crossover even gave us a real alternate universe version of Spider-Cop, which, as a fan of the PlayStation game, I have to admit makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. And it also made the Spider-Man from that game, who was also in this crossover, very happy. However, in addition to the tribute artwork at the top of the comic, did Marvel sneak another version of Stan Lee in for the fans with a keen eye? It seems so. On page 25 of Spider-Geddon number 5, the final issue in this run, we can see 2 instances of a Spider-Man who looks very familiar, and not in the he's a Spider-Man kind of way. This character is present in both panels 1 and 3 of this page and looks nearly identical to Stan Lee, especially with like his whole signature look thing. So by far my favorite version of the character. Rest in peace, Stan Lee.
Coming in at our number 1 spot, we've got to go with Miles Morales, the name that is quickly becoming just as associated with Spider-Man as the iconic Peter Parker. Originally appearing in the Ultimate Marvel Universe following the death of their own version of Spider-Man, Miles Morales was a young boy from Brooklyn with an origin story strikingly similar to Peter Parker's, but with some twists. Bitten by a radioactive spider from Osborn Industries, Miles' reason for getting his powers was due to his supervillain uncle, Aaron Davis, otherwise known as the Prowler. Quickly becoming an exciting new take on Spider-Man in his own universe, Miles Morales proved to be such a hit that he was eventually combined into the regular Marvel universe and formed a friendship/mentorship with its still alive version of Peter Parker. While many have become Spider-themed heroes over the years, Miles Morales is a character that best shows the youth and heroism that so many of us love about Spider-Man, and goes to show that anyone is capable of wearing the mask. Miles never gives up and never stops trying, and for that, he might just be the very best Spider-Man.